So welcome to
Yeah.
Outsourced Development Woes, the high cost of low cost development. My name is John Fazzaro. I'm a senior consultant with Industrial Logic. This is with me is Cecil Williams, our director of training.
Hey, everyone.
And what we want to do is, as you join, notice the comments mechanism below the video here. We want to make this as much as possible a conversation, not just between Cecil and I, but with all of you as well. And we want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions. We want to hear your experiences, your comments, your thoughts on the topic that we're going to be talking about today. So, I guess the important place to start is what do we mean when we're talking about low cost development services? Cecil, can you give us some examples, some framing of what we're talking about?
Yeah, I think, the thing that we've seen over the years is that there's a lot of times where people, organizations, teams, whatever, they need help with something, whether it's, an existing product, a new product, whatever it might be, but they're trying to, tackle something, and they feel like they either they're concerned about budget or they're concerned about timeline. Those are usually the two that impact this, it seems like.
Yeah.
So the solution, a lot of cases, is to add resources or utilize external resources of some sort. And in a lot of cases, because of budget, people will go with resources that aren't there would be what we call low cost, right? They're not going to be.
And when you say resources, you mean people.
Yes, sorry. So they're going to bring on people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. That's a reflex anymore.
It's a terrible habit. Yeah.
Somebody says resources, and I think they might be people I'm going to ask. So, like you mentioned, two things: budget and time. And there's you made me think of the iron triangle.
Yeah.
Of project management. The third leg being quality or scope.
I think
scope. Right. Yeah.
Depends on your viewpoint, but
these things in this time for this money.
Yes.
Yeah. And getting that. Yeah. Why do they call that the iron triangle? That's.
There's a lot of names for things, right? So why people, I don't know the history on it.
Yeah.
I just know a lot of people refer to it, and it certainly rings true, I think, in a lot of the cases. So, some examples, I've seen people bring on interns. I've seen people use temporary people.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen them use third party, like ourselves, but generally they're going to be a lower cost option than we are.
Yeah.
They're trying to use that. Or even I've seen where companies are trying to ramp up, and so they bring in recent graduates, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's not trying to knock anyone in any of those areas. It's just what we see is that in some cases, depending on what you're trying to do, those people may not be best suited for it because they don't have the skills yet, or the knowledge, or the experience. I think, there's a number of reasons why sometimes it turns out to not work as well as you think it's going to.
Yeah. Yeah. So to your point, we're talking about there's lots of different low cost options, some of them involving, other time zones, some of them involving, for the most part, they involve lower levels of experience, lower levels of expertise in delivering software development services. And in terms of that iron triangle, I mean, the iron triangle is about, we have to make this thing work. We have to get the scope, get the features that we want inside that time schedule, inside the budget. Sometimes one of those or two of those is more important than the other. But this is it's a logical solution to this conundrum of like we have all this stuff to do and the budget is like maybe
Oh yeah,
too
right.
small for what we want to accomplish or what we think we want to accomplish or something like that. So going with a lower cost shop is a logical choice. And as you said, the people who staff that shop and the people who choose to engage that shop, or those services, none of this is about people being wrong about those choices. But we have seen some results from that we want to talk about, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. You want to?
Yeah.
I don't want to do
Okay.
all the talking.
So in general, um, the overall thing, the message that we want to deliver, I think here, is that what we've seen from the results of engaging a lower cost development shop, they end up actually being way more expensive
That's right.
for several reasons.
Yeah.
And you can get into that, but Cecil, I don't know what is
Yeah,
that.
I think
Sum up what we're talking about?
yeah, I think so. Right. Like, you try to get something in the short term, but it's costing you long term. It's
Mhm.
really what happens. And we're just trying to make light of, make people aware of that it's not always, um, it it works potentially temporarily. I've seen times where it doesn't even work in the short term, right? That you think you're going to get something out of the um, from the people you've brought in, but um, because they've got to ramp up, because they aren't familiar, and they don't have the skills necessarily that to be able to deliver um, a high quality in a short time frame, then you end up, I think you build up, a lot of technical debt.
Mm.
Uh, you you can just see a lot of problems uh, with not meeting the requirements. And I think one of the things that I see a lot is where so many organizations want to use some form of a tool to track the work, and they're hoping they can just put the work into the tool, and then the other group that they've brought on, which are generally not co-located with them, so they're usually remote in some fashion, whether that's across the city, across the country, or globally somewhere else, whatever that might be. um, you're just assuming that they're going to be able to interpret what somebody's written in there and be able to deliver something back. And I think that doesn't work so well.
Well, I mean, isn't that the best way to create software though? Is to write it all down in documentation and then hand that documentation off to experts and they just do it, after you figure out all the problems. I mean, isn't that the way to go?
Well, I think we know better, right? We've uh, you even could go back to the Agile Manifesto, and it says that uh, that's not the best way to do it. So we definitely would want to have conversations and involve people as much, and I think that's one of the things that one of the ways you can overcome the cost issue by using higher quality resources is that if they're doing things in a way that we like to do things, where we do um, we would approach it by working on things in smaller steps and getting feedback often.
Yeah.
We're not going to be delivering something you don't want, and you're not going to get it way down the road and then find out that all that work was done on something you didn't want, and then you find out it's full of defects as well.
Yeah.
We're going to use the techniques that prevent that, like test-driven development and pairing or mobbing, things like that,
Mhm.
which a lot of those people don't do. And another thing we see is, like, a lot of times when you're hiring an external group to help you, you don't necessarily spend a lot of time putting controls around how they're going to do things because you don't want to, or you don't think you should, or whatever. Right?
Yeah.
A lot of it is you kind of want to it's almost like set it, forget it kind of a thing. You just want to hand off this piece of work and let us know when you're done kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
Well, that's kind of the promise of outsourcing.
yeah,
We're gonna
right.
package up this work and get another, another team to do it.
Yeah.
There's some things though about the, just the fundamental nature of software. I think that
Hmm.
that make this a bad idea. And where you invoke the Agile Manifesto, and even if we don't say the A word, I think there's a lot of
That's right.
there's a lot of things that we can to be discussed that our industry doesn't seem to agree on yet with itself. In the nature of this work is that as we do it, it's not a matter of whether you're good at it or not. This is with an inexperienced
Yeah.
development team or a very experienced development team. Something that's constant about the work of software is that as you do it, it yields new information that you couldn't have gotten by just thinking or doing analysis or other things. Is when you actually start building the software, it generates tons of information that needs to be captured and processed and fed back into the process. And when you're talking about, handing something off and then checking in with them, with the developers much later, that's a large feedback loop. And when you've got that much information flying off the work as you do it, you want smaller feedback
Right.
loops so you can process that information quickly, figure out what of it matters, what information can you throw away that doesn't matter, or what you can integrate into the process. And that's kind of, I think, the fundamental nature of this kind of work. And so when you engage a shop that either is inexperienced enough to think that they can just work off of one large
Hmm.
central document or repository, say we're talking about things like Jira, like a backlog of stories, like let's just load up the backlog and let them
Yeah.
go,
Uh-huh.
or hand off if you're older, hand off a requirements document and let them go. Those things don't account for all the information that's yielded in the process of doing. And less experienced developers, I remember this experience as a young developer just out of college myself,
Yeah.
was that I would see all these new things that I was discovering about the software, and then the requirements document that a much more experienced, much more serious business type person handed to me, and my imposter syndrome, more than anything, and my inexperience kept me from acknowledging that there was new information that conflicted with the instructions I was given. And so I thought I was the problem, and I kind of internalized that. And that's the instinct. That's what folks at that level tend to do.
Yeah.
And so there's a fundamental way of thinking about software development. And I think when you get into situations like we've outsourced this to a lower cost shop because that made sense in a spreadsheet, then it reveals that you're thinking in a different way about this work, a way that isn't compatible, I think, with the actual nature of the work.
Yeah. Yeah. I think well said. So we have a question, I guess, from
Yes.
the audience that we should try to. Um,
Yeah, Drew Bryan says, I'm also curious your perspective on how you think the type of software fits into this discussion. For instance, building a product like a living application for a market versus a solution, a data integration between two systems that you expect to just run with minimal support for years. What do you think about that, Cecil? Is there a distinction in terms of the type of software we're talking about?
I think it. I was about to say I think it depends, but if the product. So from the product perspective, if I was building something as a startup, then maybe I might look at getting getting it started without being too concerned about it. We've actually gone through that, and it turned out to not go so well because I think in that case they just went too long, right? So as long as that's a choice you're making, you're getting into it, and you're trying to just see if the market's going to respond to something.
Hmm.
Maybe you will use somebody that's not going to be very expensive. You might even go to one of those, online apps that people hire out their services, kind of a thing, right? Just help. Maybe you're not a developer, but you need help, a developer help. You might do something like that. But if you're a corporation trying to do a product, I think then you owe it to be a little more diligent about the level of effort you put into it and the quality, so that if it does stay around, you're not fighting it for years to come. And I think on the other side, if it's a large organization and they're trying to do some integration between systems, I've been in that boat too, and like, and I was thinking about this because like sometimes I've seen organizations will use like these lower cost outfits to be their support group. So they won't be the primary product development group, but they'll be the support group. But they're out of context. They don't know a lot of the details, and they're just trying to maintain something. And that always seems difficult too. And if it's something that's only going to need to be around for a short while, but even a few years to me sounds like long enough that I would want to, if you build up a bunch of technical debt and it's going to take that many years to fix it, then maybe there has to be a cost benefit that you do have to look at.
Well, I do see our friend Garrick in the comments weighing. Nothing lasts longer in the software world than temporary solutions that will be replaced in a few years.
Right.
Yeah.
I have worked
seen plenty of that too.
At an organization where we had an app running, we had lost the source code, and I've had places where there wasn't even, when I started as development manager, we didn't even have source code control.
Yeah.
Believe it or not. And it wasn't that long. I mean, okay, it was like 25 years ago now, so it was a while ago. But at that time, to me, I thought version control was also a thing that just everybody did, and they weren't. So that was one of the first things I changed, right? So
what, renaming the folder final
that's kind of what they were doing. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, what's your take on it, John? Like,
well, I mean, for one, I think the temporary app that lives forever.
Yeah.
Well, why does that happen? Well, because people making the decisions, maybe who aren't the same people writing the code. Usually that's the case, right?
Mm-hmm.
People make the decisions about whether that temporary app is actually going to be temporary or not. They're seeing it from the outside. They don't see the technical inner workings of it. And that, so they're making a decision without understanding what's going on inside, especially if they're not listening to the engineers about what's going on inside that temporary app, all the shortcuts maybe, and compromises that had to be made in order to make it, quick and temporary. And that, again, I think points back to what I was saying earlier about like thinking about the nature of the work. They see something that's working, and they're like, well, that's done. And it's must be production quality because I can use it.
Right.
And there's a lot of, I guess, assumptions about the external quality versus the internal quality of software and how sustainable that is, made by people who don't have the expertise or don't have the knowledge, I think, to make that decision. And you can very easily get yourself into a situation. I think you mentioned a startup earlier. We're definitely not going to name names, but there's, if it's the one the story I'm thinking of, that they were attempting to go to market with a product and had outsourced to, lower cost developers. And so in that scenario, they're trying to get to market quickly, and they did anything but, I think, because there were continual problems, both internal quality and external quality of the software, that kept them from even achieving their goal that they were, trying to go with a budget outfit in order to do.
Yeah. And some of this, I think, comes from, if you're an organization that software has not typically been your normal line of work, it's not, your core competency, you don't necessarily know what low quality looks like. You're not familiar. And, we have seen over the years now, you look at what Tesla's done to the auto industry. I've seen it with some industrial companies that I've worked with as well over the years that there's a lot of industries that have been disrupted to where there used to be a lot of analog things with hardware being the primary focus, and now they're digital, and so software becomes the primary focus. And if you're not in, if you've never been dealing with software, you just don't know. And so to you, that looked like adequate software until you see something coming from someone like us and you realize how much different it can be and how much quicker we can do it, which I think is part of the misnomer that, well, somebody that's going to take the time to do it right is going to take much longer to do it, when in fact we can turn around just as fast and give you the quality because of the approaches that we take.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that. What's the alternative to going with a low cost shop and getting something, quick and dirty, or maybe you've decided you don't care about the internal quality, you just want it to work. But like you say, the conception, the general idea is that, well, if you want quality, you're going to have to wait for it and pay for it, and and those sorts of things. How do we get both? How do we get quick and quality?
Well, I think our approach is a couple of things, and one you already mentioned earlier, which is doing small steps and getting feedback early and often. That's key. And then as far as the approach in doing something small, like Drew says, he likes to do short-term decisions and deliver something quickly. That's where I think we would approach it from a walking skeleton approach, or a primitive whole, another way of phrasing it, where it's, let's take a vertical slice. Can we get something simple that will work for the user or our potential customers or whatever, and then see if we're in the right direction and do that without putting a lot of effort in. But the work that we do to do that is going to be of high quality, because if we test drive it, we do it as a group, and we get feedback along the way early and often, we can ensure that we've got a good product. And yet we do minimal work because we aren't working on the things that we don't need to be doing.
Yeah.
So we can save a lot of time because we aren't worrying about, one of the things that I see a lot is people that aren't experienced will tend to speculate on everything and want to make sure they cover all their bases. And
they try to get it right the first time.
Yes, they're trying to get it right the first time. Exactly. That's right, John.
Yeah, there's a lot of waste incurred.
Yes, and so there's tons of waste in that. And that's some of the stuff that, over time, you learn to not do that. And I think, it's a big differentiator, I think, for us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the whole, I'm going to build something quick and get it back to you, and we're going to create short feedback loops. That might sound like a lot of meetings, and everybody knows meetings are expensive. So wouldn't that be a cost on top of, going with a higher, not a low cost option, that we're going to have all these meetings to wrangle things? Is there an option where I can just capture all the requirements and send it off somewhere?
I don't think so, right?
I don't think so either.
I think you got to be one of the things that I've seen in the shift over the industry in certainly the last 20 years, even more so the last 10 to 15, with this move to product centric teams instead of project centric teams, is that it requires the product people, the business people, to be involved continually, and not just at the beginning from inception to creating a plan of what they want and then handing it over.
Yeah.
It doesn't work anymore. You have to be constantly involved and working together. And then I think what you can find is you can have those much shorter. Those meetings will be quicker, and because you do them a lot more often. Ideally, you may even I've been on teams, some of the best teams I've been on, those people were in the room with us, with the engineering team. We were all just in one room, and there was no scheduling anything. You just turned and said, hey, can you look at this? I mean, I've had product people, QA people, whatever, look at something before I even committed it, because I wanted to know, we as a group were ready for them. And sometimes they'll even sit with us. I've had, any number of roles sit in with the group. If you do any type of ensemble or, mob programming, whatever you want to call it, software teaming, get those people involved, because they're earlier enough, and the more you get them involved, the better.
Yeah.
The way I find it, again,
That's not a failure of analysis up front. That is
no,
how great software is made.
that's right. And you're avoiding all that extra time later on that you don't need to do. So you essentially are shifting a lot of it left, but you're also reducing a lot of it, because you're getting rid of. There's a lot of, think about all the planning that people do to try to figure out all the things they're going to need before they really know for sure. They're speculating, and that's just a lot of time up front that we eliminate until we need it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so some of we've seen in other experiences with, low costs, at least part of the team being, low cost personnel, that you spend, you mentioned technical debt earlier. These people in my experience, I've seen so much technical debt rack up that it sort of cripples the code base from moving forward until that's addressed.
That's right.
And really the thing that, speaking of the way you think about the work, the mental model of the work of software, the thing that's expensive about software development in general as a medium is not the initial creation of it. We could have this conversation about AI generated code as well, but the people seem to address software productivity in terms of how quickly can we generate a pile of code, when really what costs you is not that initial generation of the code, it's the changing and evolution of the code as you integrate all the information that you learn during the making of it. And when you're optimizing either through AI or lower cost folks and not checking in, not having those feedback loops in place, you're optimizing for the generation of a lot of code, and that every line of that code is a liability, not an asset.
Right.
Especially if it's done quickly under pressure and with the idea that they're going to get it right the first time.
Yep. I think Penny has a good comment on, if you have to use another group, how can you manage that? And she's talking about, well, if we can give them some form of a behavior-driven development test or some, acceptance criteria of some sort, that, if you can do it in the form of a test, that's the best approach, because then it's working and it meets the needs. I've definitely done that, and the organizations where I've been able to do and get the product people on board with doing, specification by example or BDD, however you want to term it, it really does help get those people engaged. And when they realize that they can write something and it will tell them whether or not the system's going to work the way they want it to, they feel very empowered by that. And sometimes you can create, they get really carried away sometimes, which is great, right? Because I'd rather have too much than not enough. And, I knew a story of somebody that did that with, they were building a statistics application for, I don't know if it was MLB itself, but it was something related to baseball. And people would think of ideas of scenarios and just create new stuff on the fly all the time, which sounds similar to one of our LinkedIn users said that they did something like that, stats app for their high school basketball team, right? So, I don't think it's the same person, but you never know. But that there's definitely ways you can do it, but you have to manage it, and you can't. I think the biggest thing I would say is you can't just hand it off to them and wait and expect to get something back and hope it's good.
And even then, even when you manage them, there's a lot to unpack about the word manage. Way more than we have time. We actually have just a few seconds left, but managing, I think is itself a skill, managing this work. And so, most developers, most technicians, I think, don't understand what skills are, they don't have the skills in order to deliver small enough slices at a time in order to really remove the waste from this. So it's even difficult if you have have an expert working closely with these folks,
Right.
And sort of guiding them, because it's it is the proverbial herding cats to a certain degree.
Right.
So in any case, Cecil, great conversation.
Yeah.
Everybody on the comment thread, there's some brilliant stuff going on in there that we didn't get time to mention, but thank you all for joining us. And this has been the high cost of low cost development.
That's right.
Have a great
Thanks,
day,
everyone. Have a great day. See you.